Alright, hi guys, welcome to my screencast on my book review. The book that I read was Flip Your Classroom. So the authors were Jonathan Bergman and Aaron Sams. The main theme that I found the book to be about was utilizing technology outside of the classroom to change the learning that is happening in the classroom. And we learned a lot about the flipped classroom in our class this summer term. So I'm really not going to go into detail about what the flipped classroom is. I mean, I'm going to talk about it, but it's more about how I felt about the book, just reviewing the book. So there might be some things that I kind of go over quickly because we've already learned it. So about the authors, Jonathan and Aaron, are the first pioneers of the flipped classroom. They developed the idea together while working at the same high school as chemistry teachers. The flipped classroom was created with the understanding that some students are very busy with sports, clubs, etc. It was also created with the desire to help struggling students. Okay, so just to preface the content of my review, I do believe that the flipped classroom is a great strategy. It is for any educator who wants to change their classroom with technology, um, but you have to keep in mind that it requires the knowledge of technology. So you have to be patient with using technology. You're going to have to learn a lot about the video making process. If you're not tech savvy, you're going to have to look at tutorials on how to use the equipment. And you just have to keep in mind that you would have to make these videos in advance and post them online. So you have to also keep in mind that your student has to have access to these at home. But if you're up for the challenge, I say go for it because the end result is worth it. All right, so also something I would like to note is that the authors created a really useful book. I found that they broke down all the points really nicely. Um, Whatever you're thinking about while you're reading the book, like you're wondering about something, how do I do this, how do I do that? Well, it talks about it in detail throughout the book. And also there's like a Q&A section in the back, which is also really helpful. So all in all, I really enjoyed reading the book and it was really interesting and it wasn't really too long and it's pretty straightforward. And also something really cool is that the authors created the book with the hope that the reader could read it in one sitting. Okay, so a quick summary of the content. Flip Your Classroom is a great book that should be used as a tool and point of reference when creating your own flipped classroom. It is the perfect amount of in-depth and straight to the point. It explains how the flipped classroom flips the work being done in the classroom with the work being done at home, which creates a more meaningful use of time in the classroom. The book also discusses all of the possible questions you may have on the flipped classroom, which again, there's success stories from real educators and then the FAQ section in the back. Okay, so analysis and evaluation of chapter 1. So this talks about their background and their why. So it really sets the stage for the flipped classroom strategy. I found it to be helpful. I found the reasons as being genuine and caring. So they started with noticing their students were often absent or out of town due to being in sports. So they wanted to develop something that could be accessed from any device anywhere. And they also wanted to reach their struggling students. So in developing their videos, they found that the videos were also helpful to students who were absent or out of town. Instead of having to reteach those individuals, they directed them to the online videos, which I think is just pure geniusness because then you don't have to waste any more class time having to reteach or separately teach that student who wasn't there that day. So it doesn't waste teachers' time at all. To continue chapter 1, so it also talks about the flipped mastery model, which is just kind of, it's the same thing as the flipped classroom, but it has an added mastery system of learning. So students could reach and learn objectives at their own pace. Just like if you were to give them a library of videos and they could watch them at their own pace rather than they're all watching the same video on the same night. So if they wanted to, they can watch 2 videos a night if they feel comfortable that way. So I thought that, reading about that was really great. But I like how I wrote down right here. I feel like it could have been its own separate book, and I just feel like they're really separate strategies, and they really should have just talked about it in a separate book because that is a lot of information to add in this book. Um, so, analysis and evaluation for chapter 2, 3, and 4. So, 2, 3, and 4 all talk about the flipped classroom method. Chapter 2 goes into detail about what the strategy is. Chapter 3 talks about why you should flip your classroom. And chapter 4 talks about how to implement the flipped classroom. So, just to say, I really found these chapters to be the most important in the book. For someone who doesn't know what the flipped classroom is, it not only defines it, it also gives examples of how their time is now utilized in the class, meaning the teachers and the students' time. They compare the time spent in a traditional classroom with the flipped classroom, and the time allotted doing guided/independent work is increased by 40 to 55 minutes, which is a lot of time, which you could do so much more with that time. The comparison sold me on the strategy. So students are able to spend more time working with the guided help from their teacher. Just to continue, I think that in every book about teaching strategies, I think it is important to read about the why. So in chapter 3, the why is really important. If we don't know the why, then we won't be able to see how we or our students will be able to benefit from it. Some of the whys, I'll just read maybe two. The flipped classroom speaks the language of today's students, such as viewing videos in the era of YouTube. It also helps busy students not fall behind. And then there's also a few more if you want to pause and read. Okay, to continue, I truly think that the authors pose great reasons as to why you should use this method. I don't think that the reader really gets to thinking all that goes into the method until chapter 4. So chapter 4 is really helpful. It shows you how to implement it in your own classroom. But it is a little stressful because it talks about everything that you have to do. So it talks about what that you have to find a platform to display your videos. You have to find recording slash screencasting equipment. You have to consider the video making equipment, and you also have to plan the videos, record them, edit, and publish them. So it's really stressful to read all that because then you finally realize everything that goes into it is a lot. And what I found stressful in reading is this again is the realization of how much time goes into making these videos. All right, evaluation of chapter 5, 6, and 7. So chapter 5 and 6 and 7 talk about the flipped mastery model, which was the model I talked about earlier that I felt could have been a separate book. So chapter 5 goes heavily in depth about this model. Chapter 6 is where the authors are making their case on why you should use the mastery model. And chapter 7 discusses how to implement the model. So similar to the first flipped classroom method, they're doing the same type of thing with the flipped mastery model method. So in chapter 5, they discuss the defining differences between the old model and the new model. So they're referring the old model to the flipped method, and the new model is the flipped mastery method. So basically, the idea of the mastery learning is for students to learn the objectives at their own pace. I don't want to repeat what I said already. The strategy I felt could have been a different book, but that's just my opinion. Chapter 6 is where the authors are making their case on why you should use the mastery model. So I'll read two reasons. It teaches students to take responsibility of their own learning, and students are having to watch the videos and are given the choice of moving ahead if they feel like they are ready. And I think that this chapter makes very great points as to why someone should adopt this model because students are able to go at their own pace that works for them. A comment that I have is that the teacher would have to make sure the students are making progress. So a student could fall easily behind if they have the freedom to go at their own pace. The teacher would have to set weekly goals for the students to meet. To continue, just like in chapter 4, chapter 7 discusses how to implement the model. And like I said before, this is very insightful, but it's stressful. So they basically, similar to the flipped model, the old model, the teacher would have to build an assessment system, which could be stressful in itself. apart from making the videos. So you would have to find out how you're going to assess your students using the mastery model. You would have to find a way for the students to demonstrate understanding from watching the videos at home in order to move to the next video. The last point is that you have to allow students to manage their time. This is great to help students develop their time management skills, but the teacher would have to check in with each student to see their progress. But it's great for students to get ahead. So chapter 8 and 9. Chapter 8 is the FAQ section. Anyone who still has lingering questions about the models can refer to this section. Chapter 9 is the last chapter, which is the conclusion. Conclusions are usually supposed to be brief, but it is understood why it isn't, because the book makes a lot of points that need to be wrapped up. What I got from the conclusion is that direct lessons are not for every student, but they are great for some topics. Direct lessons should not be done in the classroom. Some lessons should be inquiry-based, where the student is discovering the content through inquiry. Some lessons are cooperative with groups and group discussions. So my conclusion, my final judgment, overall, I think that the book is a very helpful resource about the flipped classroom and flipped mastery model. It provides a nice overview for both. If you are wanting to implement the model, keep in mind the time, the technology, knowledge, the assessment system for the mastery model. Just keep that all in mind. As mentioned before, the book is detailed but brief. It doesn't have to be read cover to cover if you are only trying to learn about the traditional flipped classroom method, which is considered the old method, and I recommend the book to whoever wants to learn more about it. And then I have linked the Flip Your Classroom PDF at the bottom if you would like to read more about it. All right, and that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.